Hello, I'm Mrs. Young, and I'll be reading to you Chapter 1 from the book The Clay Marble by Mingfong Ho. And we'll start with Chapter 1, and each day we'll read a new chapter. And hopefully my goal is that we will make it through this book and you will not see me cry. We'll see. I can't promise that. All right, let's go ahead and begin Chapter 1 of The Clay Marble. I heard a cowbell at first. It was such a faint tinkling sound that I thought it was just the wind in the trees or the shrill cry of the cicadas. I looked around. Dappled shadows stirred under a thick canopy of wild tamarind and rain trees, but there was no sign of life on the narrow trail stretching out ahead of us. I held my breath and kept listening. Yes, there it was again, the clear, quiet tone of a bronze bell. "Saroon, listen," I cried. "Can you hear it?" My older brother turned to look at me. "Hear what?" he asked. "A cowbell." Saroon straightened up beside me in the ox cart and reined in the pair of oxen. Without the crunch of their hooves on the dry leaves, the forest seemed eerily quiet. "I don't hear a thing," he said. "I don't either, Dara," my mother added. She was sitting in the back of the cart behind us on a thin layer of straw. "Well, I heard it," I said. "A bronze cowbell, a big one, probably shiny too." I could imagine it gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as it swung from the neck of a strong young bull. "Which direction was it coming from?" Saroon asked. "Can you tell?" I pointed to the reddish glow of afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees. "Due west," my brother said thoughtfully, starting the oxen on their way again. "That's where we're headed. Maybe we're getting close to the border." "That's what you've been saying for days," I snapped, my hunger making me irritable. Saroon glanced over at me and tried to smile. "Maybe we'll actually reach it tonight. Then we'll have grilled fish and fresh white rice for dinner. How does that sound?" "I want something now," I said. "But you just had breakfast," my mother broke in gently. There was a bit of straw in her hair, and she looked tired and discouraged. "That was a handful of cold rice," I protested. "Besides—" Saroon gave me a warning look. "Quiet," it said. "Don't make Mother any unhappier." I remained silent. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves above and the creaking of cartwheels beneath us. And then my stomach growled. "We would have been better off if we stayed at home," I mumbled. Saroon heard me and looked annoyed. "Stayed home? For what?" he asked. "There's nothing there. No food, no seeds, no animals." I thought of our village. Saroon was right, I admitted silently. It was just an expanse of dried-up rice fields now, with a crumbling temple of flimsy huts. In the latest spate of fighting, the Khmer Rouge soldiers had even set fire to our houses and rice barns so that the invading Vietnamese soldiers wouldn't be able to claim them. But that had left us with nothing to eat. No rice seed with which to plant our next crop of rice, not even a house to live in. It had not always been like that, though. I remembered happier times when I was just 2 or 3 years old, and the smiling, round-faced Prince Sihanouk ruled Cambodia. Our little village was a peaceful and prosperous place then, the rice fields green and calm, the harvest plentiful. At weddings and on temple feast days, I had sat curled in my mother's warm lap, nibbling at some sticky rice and coconut, sleepily watching the familiar faces of my father and brother, cousins, aunts, and grandparents dancing by the light of a kerosene lamp in the temple courtyard. But then the fighting and bombing had started. At first the war had been distant and mysterious. Tiny silver airplanes, like fishes in the sky, would fly over us before disappearing into the horizon. Then the bombing had come closer, so close that the bombs shook the soil beneath my bare feet. My father and the other farmers in our village dug trenches where we all hid, crouching, at the sound of the approaching planes. For months, bombs were dropped around us, sometimes as often as 5 or 6 times a day, and many of the villagers were killed or hurt by shrapnel. Gaunt young communist soldiers dressed in black came down from the hills to tell us that it was the American imperialists who were bombing us. Kill the imperialists, they exhorted us, and kick out Prince Sihanouk. But that was like being told to catch evil spirits. So faceless and far away were the pilots in their airplanes and the prince in his palace. Yet, remote as they seemed, they must have been defeated because the bombing stopped. Soon, the communist soldiers took over the village, announcing that they had liberated us. Liberation turned out to be a long nightmare of hunger and misery and fear, always that cold, silent fear. My brother and most of the other young men in our village were sent miles away to dig ditches with huge work crews. Most of the women and children were allowed to remain at home, but we had to work much harder than before and always under the watchful eye of the armed soldiers. We never got enough to eat, and were sometimes fed only rice gruel and boiled banana stalks at dawn and dusk. One night, my father was roused from his sleep and taken away by 2 soldiers. We found his body the next day at the edge of the forest. Had he been killed because he knew how to read and write and had taught the village children their alphabet? Or perhaps because he had gone to catch some snails in their fields for my grandmother to eat because she was sick and dying? I'll never know. I knew only that I was not allowed to ask about him or even cry when I missed him. Over and over again, we had been told by the Khmer Rouge soldiers that Cambodia was one big family and that the Communist Party was our parent. And yet, in trying to create a new family, the communists destroyed my own family, ripping apart parent from child, brother from sister, husband from wife. It made no sense to me, since I could not understand how these shrill young soldiers could be my parents. But I did not dare ask. 3 years passed like one long nightmare, the kind where you're gripped by such a cold dread that you are unable to wake up from it. Finally, shortly after I turned 12, Vietnamese soldiers in green uniforms marched into our village, sending Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge soldiers on the run and liberated us again. In the confusion, while the 2 armies were busy fighting each other, Saroon and some other farm boys escaped from their work crew, and they made their way home. What a strange reunion that was, so muted and sad. Father was dead, Mother told Saroon, and grandmother as well. Describing how other relatives had died or disappeared, Mother started to weep. But Saroon stopped her. "It's not time to grieve yet," he said. "This is our chance to save what's left of our family. The Khmer Rouge butchers are in retreat, and the new Vietnamese-controlled regime doesn't seem to have much power over us yet. We've got to try and put our own lives in order now." And he told us of his plan to cross overland through western Cambodia to the border between our country and Thailand. He had heard rumors of a refugee camp called Nong Chan, located on the Thai-Cambodian border, where free food and tools were being handed out. Thousands of farmers all over Cambodia had made their way there, he told us. That's our only hope, to go there and stock up on food and rice seed and other supplies. Then we can come home, repair the house, replant our fields, and start our lives over again. Mother shook her head wearily. "How can we know if the fighting will ever stop?" she asked. "Or if the Khmer Rouge won't win back control of the country? How will we know that we can ever live in peace?" "We won't know, Mother," Saroon said gently, "but at least we can try." Quietly, my mother looked at the scorched earth around her, and then, without another word, dug up her small silver amulet of the Lord Buddha from where she had buried it years ago beside the bamboo grove. Then we hitched up our ox cart and started the long journey westward. That was 9 days ago, and our meager supply of food and our strength were running low. Yet there was still no sign of this border. Instead, we had caught so many glimpses of fighting and bloodshed on the main roads that we decided to take to the small dirt paths winding through the forest. Sometimes we met other people traveling in small silent groups, on foot or in ox carts like ours. But beyond exchanging a cautious greeting or some brief directions, no one ever talked to us. Once we met some Vietnamese soldiers on patrol who saw us before we could hide, but they made no attempt to stop us. By Sarun's calculations, we should have been at this refugee camp at the border 2 days ago. I stole a glance at him now. What if he was wrong, and there was no such thing? The thick forest stretched out in front of us, quiet and dark. There seemed to be no end to it. Then I heard it again, the distinct sound of a clear bronze bell in the distance. It was coming closer. I sat up straight and noticed that Sarun had cocked his head toward the sound, so he had heard something too. Then I saw it. Smooth and polished, the bronze bell flashed in the afternoon sun. It was dangling from the neck of a milk-white Brahmin bull, who slowly emerged from the shadows of some teak trees. I told you, I said triumphantly. Sarun just stared, awestruck. The bull was pulling a cart heaped high with gunny sacks of rice, with plowshares, with hoe heads, with rope, and even fish nets. So heavily laden was the cart that it swayed from side to side as it moved, creaking noisily. As we watched, the wheels of the ox cart slipped into the deep rut and it lodged there. The driver stood up in the cart and flicked his whip at the ox, urging it to pull. Nostrils flared. The bull strained at its harness. But it was no use. The cart did not budge. Sarun jumped down from our ox cart and ran over to the other wagon. Nodding briefly at the driver, he gripped one of the spokes with the stuck wheel and he began to push. The other man climbed down and joined him. For some time there was the only sound of grunts as both men applied their weight to either side of the large wooden wheel. Then slowly, inch by inch, they eased it out of the rut and the cartwheel rolled free. The stranger wiped the sweat off his forehead and his sleeve. Thanks, brother, he said. It's nothing, Sarun replied. That's quite a load you have there. The man laughed. Everything a person could want, he said. Sarun circled the cart. There was a small tear in one of the sacks, and he squeezed something out of the slit, onto his hand, and I heard him gasp. What is it? I asked. Wordlessly, he came over to me and stretched out his hand. Cupped in his palm were some grains of rice, each one still encased in a protective shell of thin brown husk. Rice seed, he said, his voice soft with wonder. My heart leaped. Rice seed? Rice, not just to eat, but to grow? Looking at the brown husk cupped in my brother's hand, I felt that we could really go home and plant a good crop after all. Where did you get this? Sarun was asking the other man. Is there any more? Any more? Brother, is there any more water in the sea? Is there any more soil on the ground? The man laughed again, a deep, throaty laugh. There is more rice there than I've ever seen in my life. Husked rice, long rice, short rice, sticky rice, fragrant rice. And rice seed? Sarun prompted. Rice seed? Listen, if they stacked up all the bags of rice seed there, they'd have a pile as high as the Cardamom Mountains. And all this was at the border? Sarun asked. It's not just rice, brother, the other man went on. Why, they've got enough tools there to build another Angkor temple and enough fish nets to catch all the fish in Tonle Sap Lake. Tell me where, Sarun asked, his voice urgent. Was it at the border? Of course, the stranger said, at Nong Chan. Sarun swallowed hard. Nong Chan? He repeated. I could see the lump in the throat bob up and then down. It's true then? Those rumors of free food and supplies at the refugee camp, it's all true? It was not really a question but a plea. I realized then that despite my brother's assurance to us, he must have had doubts all along. The stranger sensed the tension in Sarun and grew serious. If I laughed too much just now, he said, it was not because I was joking. No, it's just that the happiness keeps jumping out of my throat. Yes, brother, it's all true. What they say about the border. and there's more there for free? Just stand in line and they practically throw things at you, the man said and laughed. Behind me, I saw my mother bow her head over her silver amulet and pray. Thanks be to the Lord Buddha, she whispered. And although for the past 3 years I had not prayed, so that now I could barely remember the words with which to speak to the Buddha, I bent my head and gave thanks too. And that's the end of chapter 1 for the clay marble, and we will pick up with chapter 2 tomorrow. I hope you're going to enjoy this book as much as I love it. All right, have a good day.